All right, we will go ahead and get started. Today is Monday, March 9th. Calendar oddities for me. First day after switching our clocks in this time zone always screws everything up. We have a couple of things on the agenda. I guess I should start with saying this is the SIG release meeting. This will be recorded. We follow the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. Please adhere to that. The recording will be posted to YouTube after the meeting. We have a modest number of attendees today. We've got a couple of things on the agenda. Rather than go through team updates, we've got the release engineering meeting every other week off of this one, and the release team right now is super active right ahead of the release. So rather than being redundant relative to those things, why don't we just push into the open discussion section for the day? Do you want to start, Bart? Sorry to put you on the spot all of a sudden.
No worries. Yeah, so my point is I would like to start discussion because I don't exactly understand what you need from Case Infra. Because this established like Kubernetes build stage release process, which Steven created, is kind of, there's a lot of points there, and I don't know what is being expected from us at this point. So I think that we need to wait for Steven, or maybe you know. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. I am not intimately familiar with all of the points on the big list. Steven's been doing a ton of work in the last couple of days. Things are flying by on GitHub, and I need to spend the better part of my day, I think, catching up just with what all's gone by. And we don't have him today, no?
Even topic, like, I don't see any difference at this point on the new infra. So build stage release at this point, the process is, as far as I know, the same. So there's, as I said, there's a lot of points which I don't see any of those directly needing something from us at this point. But Steven, the last time, Steven very directly said that he wants our feedback at this issue. So
yeah, he actually just mentioned a moment ago on Slack that he is intending to join. He's having computer issues, so
Hi.
oh, there he is.
Hey, how's
Welcome.
You've got mail. No.
Bart has questions for you.
Bart, kick it.
Yeah. The biggest and main question is what do you need from us at this point? Because I see a lot of points there, and I don't know how best I can help you.
Yeah, I think it's. I want to say it's nothing right now, because our stuff primarily runs in GCP. So you were mentioning asking if we needed a cluster. I don't think we need a cluster yet. The one I'm wondering about is the build process, right? So the staging and release side runs via GCP, but the build process is the CI Kubernetes build and CI Kubernetes build fast jobs, which run in Brow. Those run, well, they run on Brow, right? So I had done a prototype job of it running within GCP. But I think what I would want to do is turn that either. So I was talking with Catherine, and we were talking about like potentially having a separate release cluster. So you know how there's the test infra trusted one right now for the image building pushing jobs. Instead, having a release cluster so we can do whatever we want with it.
So the case is that if the new cluster will have to be at our new like CNCF managed infra, this is a longer process because we first need to move the Pro, but before Pro we need to move the Velodrome to the new infra, and this is the process which I'm afraid will take months. So,
yeah. Yeah.
I think that if they are talking about the new cluster for just release, it is still being discussed on the old infra, because I would be very, very surprised if we will manage to move Velodrome in like the next,
Recently-ish, right? like soonish, right?
that we will make it this year, but I'm not entirely sure. So
Okay.
this is the hardest project to be moved. After that is Pro. So
Yeah.
are the last ones which we plan to move.
Okay. So so for new Prow, for new Velodrome, um, I what's the process? How much do you know about the process?
So about the process of building and releasing the images.
Yeah. Well, not the images that everyone else is using, like the image building and pushing stuff. Actually, like the process of building and maintaining Prow and Velodrome.
I don't have. That's the point. I don't have a lot of no, just digging into, and this is a lot of stuff. So I think that the best person to discuss it will be. I forgot one of the chairs of SIG testing.
Maybe Aaron.
Yeah, I think because we had like a short discussion at our Kate Infra working group, and there was like a 5 minutes introduction about how Velodrome is working and what we need to do to move it in our new infra. But I feel like it's just was like a little bit portion of information.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I doubt. So I think based on that, I think that it probably makes sense for us to do what we've been doing, Tim, in the meantime, and let things run as they run. If when Prow gets migrated, then we will be on new infra for the build jobs. I think that for build jobs, at least, it's another test job. If we decide that one of the things I had in mind is, what if the GCP builder tool that we have is able to, I think I had mentioned this before, there's something like a cloud build local mode that the GCP cloud, the G Cloud build submit can run in. If we could,
I can point you to it because I'm helping a little bit with the tool, because there is a few problems with grabbing logs. So maybe I will have more knowledge like soon about how it works and if it has already this functionality. Like this.
So which tool are you referring to?
The tooling, I will send you a link. This is the SIG test, the test infra.
Images builder.
This one.
Yeah, I wrote some of that, so I know. I like the logging. If you're having problems with the logging thing, there is a flag that you might need to use for the jobs. Log to standard out equals yes or something like that.
Yeah, so discussed with Catherine, and there is a process, like there will be a process of rewriting, removing the G-Cloud CLI to go SDK.
Okay, so that's why I was saying we should find out more about what you were trying to do with it, because we've forked that tool, and that's the basis for our Krell GCP manager. This
is just discussion, but it's kind of soon it can happen. But this is not not at the point where we started working on that yet. So
okay. So what I'm saying is pull us into that discussion, because we're also working on that tool in a different way.
Sure.
For the in general, is that all that you needed to know, at least on the build side?
Yeah. At this point, I was curious if I can help you improve something quick, but if you will something like that,
Yeah, no, it feels like that part is going to be slow going. So yeah, I think I think we'll take cues from y'all on where Prow is living and when it's living. For the staging and release process, at least, I've been making a few tweaks to our infrastructure. So let's see if I can give me a second. I'm going to share some stuff. Computer's still doing computery things. So, all right, let's see. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Let's go to 911 because that is such an apt such an apt issue number for establishing building the build, staging, release process on Kate's Infra. So some of the stuff I've been working on in the background since when this issue was open in October. And some of it is starting to finally land around kind of like this prod, like late staging prod test phase, right? So one of the things that we did, so this is kind of part of the mention that Linus had of migrating over to doing this VDF vanity domain flip of kates.gcr.io. Because we depend on because parts of our release process are entwined with working with being able to push to both the staging repository as well as the prod repository. So our current GCV has access to push into either of those projects. So there isn't an image promotion per se, at least for us in Anaga. So that cutover kind of feels like a good time to also move us over to new infrastructure for the staging and release process, right? So right now our staging, so let's go to SIG release, and this thing that merged earlier today. So I think this is where we landed, right? I just wanted to scribble something real quick about where some of the new bits are. So today, if you create a project in, or if you want to create a project in kates.io, right? There is one, we have a groups definition, right? So of course, some more fun little YAML, right? Where you can go and look up, let's take infra release, right? Admins, right? Gives you an idea. So this block here defines the Kate's Infra release admins group, right? And this group has essentially like partial admin access to some of the release GCP projects, right? The projects that we have, so we have an admins, an editors, and a viewers group, right? So these are the sets of the release engineering subproject owners, the patch release team and branch managers, and then finally the release manager associates, right? Each of them have, so we use each of these groups to delegate access across the projects. Now for the way that's configured is Infra GCP, right? So we have one for release projects and we have one for staging. We have a RelEng one. So if we look at the staging one, it kind of goes through and does some stuff. It loops over staging projects and later on release projects, and it does a few things for that project. It sets a set of writers, makes sure that the staging buckets exist, sets a retention period for those buckets, make sure that the project exists, make sure that you have a view access, right? So you need you need a certain permission on GCP to allow you to actually view the console. So it's kind of a view-only mode that all of the writers need before essentially layering more permissions on top of that. Making sure that the GCR exists, the container registry exists, and then a few more things like GCS is enabled, and permissions for the buckets. And then finally GCB, which is kind of our bread and butter for the stage and release process. And then also that Prow can write into the project, right? So this is important for the image building and pushing jobs within Prow. So now we have a special case for the release managers. Essentially what this just does is it takes one of these repos, again, Kubernetes, release test or release RREL eng, loops over that and makes sure that the release viewers, so that Kate's infra release viewers group has view access. So this is so that our release manager associates can actually see the projects and see the logs for the various release engineering projects. We enable the KMS API for staging release test. This is going to change in a future PR. It is. Yeah, so this one is going to change a little in a future PR, where we basically want to make sure that each of the release projects have access to have the KMS API enabled. The reason for this is that, and aside from that, that the staging, the cloud build account for the staging project can write into the test prod project, right? So going back to that list, there are a few things going on. We have a bunch of projects now. So we talked a little bit about IAM. The projects, I've kind of split this into the projects that we use for specifically for releases, and then the projects that we use for release engineering, right? So whether it be the tooling or something that eventually connects into the release project process, the kind of breaking these up, right? So we have some active ones right now: Kubernetes release test and Google Containers. Google Containers is the production project for Kubernetes releases. So if you've ever seen something that is kates.gcr.io, that is a vanity domain for gcr.io/Google Containers, right? If you've ever seen the gs/Kubernetes release/release, that is within this Google Containers project as well, right? That is our prod project, right? Kubernetes release test is the project that release managers primarily work in. That's the staging project for Kubernetes releases. Coming to newcomers on the block, we've got Kate staging Kubernetes. This one is going to be used specifically for staging Kubernetes, but on Kate's infra, right? And this is only staging Kubernetes, right? So the only assets that should be in there are ones that are related to the release process, artifacts that we would want a user to pick up eventually, right? Release test prod, this is our kind of pre-prod environment, right? This is what we're using to vet, or this is like our test prod environment, whatever you want to call it. It's essentially the one that we're using to vet our tools against, right? Are we able to promote things from bucket to bucket? Are we able to actually push images, or are we actually able to pull certain files out of this, right? Testing the interaction between us and what production would look like, right? And then finally, there's Kate's artifacts prod, right? And Kate's artifacts prod, this goes into, so tenancy as in where this project is actually located, right? So this is Google infrastructure versus Kubernetes infrastructure. Who owns it? Release engineering for a few of these projects. Google. This one is a black box for us, right? And then finally for Kate's artifact prod, it's working group Kate's infra. This is what everything lands in, right? So if you have been building images, pushing images to your staging repositories, and then promoting them, this is where they end up, right? Kate's artifacts prod / each of them are namespaced. Each of the manifests are essentially namespaced to your project, right? So if you have a project like Kate's staging build image, right? Your promoter manifest, the way we define how you promote the images, will likely be something like Kate's. So there are some geographic domains for each of the locations, right? So there's a primary gcr.io, which is essentially a vanity thing for my God, my words are killing me right now. So there's a US, an EU, and an Asia endpoint for each of these. And so you might see in a promoter manifest something like Kate's GCRIO manifests, right? And let's just look at the build image one I was talking about, right? So promoter manifest, and then US GCR.io, Kate's artifacts prod, and then build image, right? So that last bit, everything outside of the Kate staging hyphen, it was what becomes your namespace, right? So at least for the case of Kubernetes, we're kind of special cased here, where the artifacts that we have today will end up landing in the root. So this is currently a test endpoint, right? Our test namespace for us to promote images into while we're using kind of like this test prod situation. And then once we're actually cut over to the new kates.gcr.io on Kate's infra, this will get dropped, right? So this we'll be pushing into the root of each of these endpoints, because this is kind of for breakage, right? We want to make sure that everyone who's been using images like Kube API server, right, are still using the same image URLs, right? So I'm going all over the place. Does anyone have questions about this right this second? Okay, all right. So on the release engineering side, there is the Kate's Infra SIG release prototype one. I'm not sure, Tim, I think you might be the only one here with access to that one. But I'm considering that one deprecated, right?
Yeah.
I think we playgrounded it for a little bit, maybe one or two of us, but we never got that one kicking. The one that we were primarily using for release was Kate's staging release test. That one is now also deprecated. The new one that we're using for release engineering specific work is Kate's staging rel-eng. And the one that we're using for prod things for release engineering is Kate's rel-eng prod, right? Now, when we say prod things, KMS will be one of the examples, right? So for KMS, for the staging and release process, we rely on the GitHub token of the Kate's release robot to be able to commit, push, and create GitHub releases for Kubernetes, right? So the idea is that the Kate's rel-eng prod project would act as a bucket for things that are important to our processes, right? So one example would be KMS, where we want a central place. We have several jobs across multiple projects that would be dependent on the GitHub token of that user, right? So why not put them in one place? Why not put them in one place and let this single project delegate access to who can and can't decrypt from it, right? So that's kind of what's set up right now. The Kate staging Kubernetes and Kate staging RHEL-Eng projects have decryptor access to this RHEL-Eng prod project, and I've loaded up the RHEL-Eng prod project with the current GitHub token. So basically, any GCP job that kicks off on that has the token specified in its secret environment, the Kate staging Kubernetes or within a Kate staging RHEL-Eng job. I've also added that functionality for the Kubernetes release test project. So essentially, the project that is on Google infrastructure is able to reach in and decrypt that token. If you want to see that, that's basically this PR. So basically, you have a keyring and a set of keys that you would specify. So there is an IAM policy binding command for KMS, and here I'm using the service account of the cloud build user, right, for the Kubernetes release test project, and I'm giving it the role to decrypt keys, right? And then if that's successful, it will read out a set of members. It'll say, hey, I've updated that role, and here are the set of members that have that role that you were just talking about, right? So these are the service accounts for Kubernetes staging, Kate's staging Kubernetes, Kate's staging RHEL-Eng, and then Kubernetes release test projects, right? So now when GCP runs on these, if they need to, they will be able to. So you see in these cloud build configs, we kind of cut these over. We cut these tokens over, right? So any questions on that? Okay, because I know I've been hacking on some of this in the background, and I wanted to take an opportunity today to just catch y'all up, because this is mostly new information for a lot of you. All right. So moving into this, there are a few more things that we have to do. And one of them is enabling the KMS API for the other release staging projects. You saw the PR for that. Moving the KMS keys, saw the PR for that. Staging account with, okay, saw that PR too. So making sure that the staging account has access to copy GCS objects into the prod test account. We need this because Anago has access currently, or GCB has access currently to write from the Kubernetes release test project into the Google Containers project, right? So basically, when we stage assets within the staging run, we then, after we've prepared that tree and put it somewhere, we then copy that in the nomock run of the release into the prod release buckets, right? So for that to happen, GCP essentially has to have the permission to copy from staging to prod. So we need to eventually talk a little bit about image promotion for staging. Right now, this kind of happens. As a side effect of what Anago does, right? So Anago has, I think I had mentioned in the beginning, Anago has access to, or GCP has access by way of Anago, or Anaga has access by way of GCP on the Kubernetes release test project to push to both the staging Kate's gcr.io registry as well as the kates.gcr.io registry, right? So those are both registries that live on the Google side. So as we're moving into new infrastructure, we need to use the image promotion process for those images, which means so everything listed as there is everything listed here. So these images that we tend to care about: Cloud Controller Manager, Conformance, Hypercube, Kube API Server, Kube Controller Manager, Kube Proxy, Kube Scheduler. We need to be able to promote the release manager needs to be able to issue a PR to promote them from staging to prod. We'll no longer have access to directly push via Anago, and we shouldn't anyway, right? So figuring out what that looks like. I was talking a little bit with Linus about this, and I opened an issue for it somewhere, right? So wouldn't it be cool if we had a simple CLI tool that would figure out all of the digests and tags on the staging side, read the manifest that is already stored, the promoter manifest that is already stored on the kates.io repo, and then merge the two together, right? So if I say I'm releasing 118.0, if I have tags on the staging repo that say 118.0, I want you to take them, I want you to merge them into the current YAML config for the promoter manifest, right? And then from there, you would get an output to a YAML file, and you would pop that into kates.io, right? So you'd be able to see a simpler diff without having to hand cobble updates to this file, since it's quite a bit of images, right? It's multiple images. It's excuse me. It's multiple images of multiple architectures. So I think it's prone for error. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this soon, right? So I want to take some time to write all of what I just said up and send that out to the release managers group, the release team, SIG release proper, as a follow-up to Linus's email about the cutover, because potentially, I know he's going to be taking a look at this, but potentially if someone is interested in working on writing this tool or adding functionality into the current image promoter tool, that's a possibility, right? So the tentative plan is to go for this on April 1st, not a joke, actually doing it on April 1st. So the reason for that is that we want to make sure that we do it soon after a release, right? It cannot affect our current release cycle, right? Release for 118 is scheduled for March 24th. So what we wanted to do initially was maybe consider doing this after the first patch of 118 went out. But timing-wise, it's aligning that we do it pre-patch, right? So the idea is that we would flip the current Kates current gcr.io/Google containers to read-only mode, right? So in the background, what's happening is we're doing backfill of the existing images in Google infrastructure and moving those into the new prod, right? So Kate's artifacts prod, and then once we're in freeze, we basically what the freeze is supposed to eke out is determining whether people are still pushing to the repo post announcement, right? Let a few days settle, and then proceed with the actual cutover. So our side and moving our staging and release process over to K8s Infra will be happening in tandem with this. So we have until that time, a few weeks, to look at this a little bit more deeply. So I will work on a timeline from our perspective, from the release engineering perspective, and get back to you. You'll see an email soonish. Cool. So any questions? Tim, questions?
I just saw my email like every 5 minutes over the weekend, a new GitHub notification, and I've got like 3 pages of stuff to click on and read. So I'll have questions in a week or two, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been, last week I was essentially hounding Tim and Dims and Christoph to get these projects started, because I have Anago anxiety, and I know something is going to happen with that tool that is going to put us in a weird state potentially. And I want to try to tease that stuff out as quickly as possible. So having the new official staging projects means I can test the way that it should be close to prod now. And yeah, stay tuned. I think it's all going fine right now. Stay tuned.
Fantastic.
And wow, that managed to be 42 minutes of the meeting. Okay. So next step.
Well, Bart, we'd started with a question from you. Was there anything within that where you felt like you needed any other info?
No.
Okay. So next up, I threw this mention on the agenda. So previously in the meeting, we've talked a fair amount about KEP, that is the enhancements poll 1497 annual support cycle KEP, coming out of the working group LTS with a variety of folks involved. We had originally hoped to be driving conversation kind of this month ahead of Contributor Summit in Amsterdam. Obviously that's not happening now, so we're just out re-chatting with SIGs, trying to understand, have folks been following the discussion on the KEP PR? Do people have things that haven't been captured there? And then especially for a couple of the SIGs, were this KEP to go implementable, do people think that we would be ready for it? So I wanted to throw that out there to see if anybody here has any thoughts or concerns.
Okay, I'll go. So testing, SIG testing comes to mind for some of this. If we're going to expand the support cycle, are we able to do that? Are the tests that we use, will they be supported for the time that we need them to be, right? There is another idea within that too, which I really like, but it's people would have to be on board with it, and it's the idea of essentially extending the release cycle, making the support window a year by extending the release cycle and only having 3 releases a year instead of 4, right? So that would ultimately make turn the support cycle into a year. And you know, the question for me there is, would someone on the release team want to be on for 16 weeks instead of instead of 12, 13 or something. Am my numbers right-ish?
Which release team role are you talking about?
The release team in general. That would extend. So if we decided to extend the release cycle, would be extending it for the entire team. So that.
Oh, sorry, you said weeks and I heard months. Never mind.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So right now we have sort of 3 months-ish. It would turn into 4 months-ish for a cycle. The bigger lifetime of a given release would be under support instead of 12, slightly more than 12-ish. A little bit of ramp up, a little bit of ramp down afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, weeks versus months. Never mind.
Yeah. So we're looking at
volunteers for release team is a good point. That's
So that was my biggest concern there.
So did you comment on that relative to Tim St. Clair's question? Because that was something that for the most part was orthogonal to what's written in the KEP, but as an alternative suggestion,
Mm-hmm.
it is important to capture pros and cons on that too, I guess.
I've got to jump back into the KEP, honestly, because I think read through it when we were initially deciding that it was going to be pushed to 119. So since then, I've been heads down on some of the release engineering stuff. So should get back to that. Yeah.
We talked a fair amount about various toolings, things that we're changing. Stephen, you mentioned Inago and being worried about it. For those of you there's a variety of folks on the call who've been playing around with tooling and seeing things go by. I'm wondering what you think about readiness. Like, right now we have these support branches, and if we accept that our tooling potentially is snapshotted relative to the stuff that it is being used to build, like there's multiple ways about this. We could just keep the tooling always working backwards compatible, but sometimes we have breakages and maybe we end up with branches of tools. So there's the tooling that built 118 originally and it keeps building 118 for a year. Depending on which way we go about that, how do people feel? Are our tools too fragile to keep around and keep patch support, or are we changing things too dynamically to keep backward support for more than a few weeks or months? What are people thinking there?
I did have a slightly related question to that in terms of just overall focus of the projects that we're working on as a SIG, and just what some of the thoughts are around, like what's the focus for the next 3 months, 6 months. I know tech is hard to to keep a pulse with on that front, especially with as things change for us from release to release. But I've liked seeing, we're tackling tech debt, and we're trying to make these tools easier to use overall, is at least my perspective on that issue. But is there any commentary on kind of like a longer term plan or things that y'all want to see as chairs, with moving this project forward? Is it just kind of eliminating that tech debt and moving to things that are easier to use for the groups, or are there a few other things that we should be mindful of as we see these changes come in?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. No, I'm kidding. I think this is kind of going back to I think the meeting you were on, Bart, maybe a few weeks ago, around like the first thing I want to see is maintainability of these tools, right? Because like that, having Sasha and Dan and a few others be able to come in and actually work on these things, and not have to sit down and do essentially what I did earlier in this call and explain like a vast swath of things that are going on. Having that knowledge in multiple people's heads like increases the maintainability, and it means that like we can start to tackle different things that are maybe even hairier than just the supportability of the tools, right? So I see that as a primary concern. I see how do we support SIGs in what they do day to day, right? So one of the things that comes to mind is like, well, how do we support ourselves, right? And we're a best case scenario for us is to move to Kate's Infra for all of the things that we do, right? So how do we support ourselves long term? It's really a huge chunk of it is get off of Google infrastructure, right? Because not all of us can see what's happening behind the scenes there, right? So you've got the LTS proposal that is huge on my mind, as well as the out of tree for KubeADM, right? So some of the tools that we're building right now are going to be eventually used for support like that, right? And then figuring out what our versioning strategy is for Kubernetes release, because and what's kind of like the order of operations for the way we should release, right? So things like the publishing bot can take a look at the tags that exist in Kubernetes and shard those tags out to multiple repos based on the way that staging is configured and the publishing bot is configured. Is it possible to do something similar like that for Kubernetes release, right? For the things that we use, right? Because the question became like, if we depend on the tools, if multiple people depend on the tools and multiple people depend on our versioning strategy for whatever reason, do we go with the versioning strategy that's in Kubernetes? How do we do branches? How do we do, like, when do we tag? Why do we tag, right? Right now, I essentially tag I should tag later today, right? I essentially want to tag the repo before we hit another release, right? So beta 2 is going out tomorrow, I believe. So it is it's cherry pick deadline today for the upcoming patches. I believe that's 117 for 116 a lot and numbers, 116.9 and 115.11, I think, that are coming out soon. And so those are slated to come out on Thursday. So even though one gets to a point where we're actually using the tools tagged at that point in time, right now we're just kind of doing the tag as a snapshot, right? Some of the jobs that we have running within Prow are configured to use the latest tags of images, right? But that's because our tools are changing so rapidly that for us to change a tool, cut a tag, go back to test infra, change the tag, maybe something's wrong. Okay, do it again, right? And then come back to test infra. It's kind of a bit of a churn. So that's why some of the tools have been targeting latest. But I would like to get away from that. I would also like to have a project, which we do now, the Kate's staging Relinch project specifically there, so that we can promote things into a prod project, right? So the idea of having the kubepkg image, or the Krell image, or the Kate's cloud builder image that we use for our build assets, be tagged at a point in time and be in a production location, that's important to me too, right? So we're not quite there yet, but I think we have a lot of the pieces in hand. I think it's a bit of it will be trying to forecast what people need in the next 6 months, a year, 18 months, right? And I think we're doing it so far. But probably the most important thing is going back to maintainability, making sure that we're writing things that are maintainable by multiple people, because it's not sustainable for only a few people to be able to touch a Nago, right, safely, right? Yeah.
Cool. No, thank you. That answers my question. I think I saw that too, and was lucky enough to go to Scale this weekend and talk with a few contributors about really just removing that reliance on Google's infrastructure. They gave us the credits, and just kind of like, hey, let's actually do that thing that they were incentivized to do. So cool. That firmed things up for me. Thank you.
Cool. All right.
We got a couple more minutes. Should we try and talk about the other two things very quickly? I know we've got Alejandro on the line.
And the removing the Debian one might have been Hannes that put this in future topics. I keep dragging it back. I keep dragging it into the agenda, but I'm not sure who initially put it up. The TLDR of that is we're going to try to remove them because we don't maintain them well as a project. So this is like the Debian base, the Debian IP tables, Debian Hypercube base images. We want to base those containers. So these are images that eventually get used by different containers like kubeproxy or kube API server, right? These are the images that are the basis for the images that we essentially put out in production. So it's important that they are maintained and protected and all that good stuff, right? So the idea is that we would maybe move to just using the Debian Slim image as the base for most of this. So Hannes has one PR up that turns on image building for the Debian images, and that one I think is linked in the meeting notes. Alternatively, so there's some back and forth chat with Tim Allclear about the security posture of those images, and we kind of got to the point where we're like, well, what if we just throw them out? What if we just stop trying to maintain these? Because this is another situation where the only way to push those images, like maybe someone flips a version number within Kubernetes for the Debian Hypercube base image. What does that version number flip do? Nothing, absolutely nothing. You still need a Googler to go build this image and make sure that it's pushed with the correct version number and then promoted to kates.gcr.io, right? So it's one of those things that we cannot maintain as a community because we do not have access to maintain those things. Which is, as we're changing some of this, we recently moved the, I think I was talking about this in the last release engineering call, but we've recently moved the cube cross image, which was kind of behind the Google curtain into Kate's Infra, right? So there are steps in the right direction. It's going to take a little work to remove those images. So when I have time, I'm going to go poke back at that PR and see if maybe we can toss a few people at it. So I think that's most of the update for that one. Jorge, if you want to talk about the CI signal stuff.
I actually don't have any groundbreaking comments. I left some couple ideas. I left in the issue. I left some ideas, some proposals of things the CI signal subproject could do. But in general, I just wanted to swing by again and ask for some general life advice and wisdom from you all on how to possibly move this thing forward or sideways or move it in some direction. So
yeah, that spun out a little bit. And my expectation was that I was going to open the issue. It's going to be super simple and like not non-contentious. I think some of the way I phrased the issue initially makes it sound that it's scope creepy into SIG testing, and that's not the intent. I think I specified on the issue like this is a brain dump, and these are some of the ideas of things that we could do. Right, the one that I'm most concerned with is making sure that we have people looking at the health of all of the jobs that are on blocking and forming boards, right? And not just for the current cycle, but across all of the cycles. Anything that comes after that is icing on the cake to me, honestly, right? So I will come back and say, let's choose to defer a lot of these decisions, right? Let's have the first action that the team does be deciding what's in scope for the team. I think that's a good first action to have. So I will go back to that proposal. I will strip anything that is contentious from it and say that like those are things that the team should go after analyzing first. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and other than that, for anyone that might be interested in this, I think throughout the discussion, we also, myself and Catherine, Ben, and a lot of people threw out ideas of what will be in scope and what not. So possibly some other ideas and recommendations in there. So any feedback, welcome from you and anyone who might be interested in this.
Cool. And with that, that wonderful beep, we are at time. Thank you so much, everyone, as usual, for coming and hanging out with us on Monday, early Monday for some people. I will catch you on the next one.
Thank you, everybody.